So this talk is more to do with my personal journey over the last probably 4 years of trying to really go back and understand the importance of solo working rather than collaborative working, and I'm going to share some of the experiences that I've done through that. I want you guys to. By the way, if you are on Twitter and stuff like that, please use the hashtag #LessCollaboration so we can then collaborate on Twitter. I want you to write a word or a phrase that comes to your mind when you think about collaboration. Everyone's got a word or a phrase that they think of when they think of collaboration. I asked a bunch of people at the conference, not this one, but the previous couple of conferences, and people said these things. I'm just going to quickly run through some of the pictures of what people think when they think of collaboration. Does this match with something that you thought about? This is going to be an interactive, collaborative session. Cool. Few other words that come up when people talk about this is essentially like working in groups, shared understanding and shared goals, collective ownership, more productivity, more creativity, democracy, stuff like this. Let's look at Wikipedia's definition of collaboration, which is the largest collaborative platform online. So the three things that I want you to focus on is basically, achieve shared goals, working together, and consensus. That's kind of the three kind of keywords that if you want to pick up from this. Jean Tabeka, who's written a book on collaboration, explained, basically says collaboration is about working agreements, having a working agreements, working collectively to decide what needs to be done. And then basically you could go off and work on your own, but have regular checkpoints. And to her, that's kind of what collaboration means. David Hussman, a good friend, says co-location does not mean collaboration. A lot of people kind of confuse the two. And Jeff Patton says that collaboration, people don't realize how bad they are at collaboration, and a lot of us kind of keep talking about collaboration. Talking about deterrents of collaboration, Pollyanna actually has a very nice slide which talks about some of the deterrents of collaboration. And then I asked these folks, when would they recommend not to collaborate? So these are all things that you would collaborate for. These are things you need for collaboration, but when you would not collaborate for. And these were some of the responses I got from people. If you already know what you want, don't waste my time pretending to collaborate. Lack of respect for different skills and approaches. If you're not inclusive, don't collaborate. If you're trying to collaborate based on opinions and not experience and expertise, then don't collaborate. And don't use collaboration to manipulate other people. This is kind of what came up. While I was busy collaborating with all these folks and trying to put this talk together, I pretty much ran out of time. So that's pretty much my talk. Well, it was a joke just to demonstrate what collaboration can get to. A lot of people think, a lot of you might have come to listen to my experience on collaboration and not listen to what a bunch of other people had to say, right? Yes? No? Hopefully. All right, I can spend the next 30 minutes I have on talking about myself, right? So my name is Naresh. I help with the conference program here. I live in Mumbai. I don't yet act in Bollywood. I worked for a company called DirectEye, which recently sold one of their businesses for 900 million. It's a pretty big deal in India. I used to work with Joshua as a partner at Industrial Logic. We built e-learning. You probably heard Joshua yesterday. I started another company called Adventure Labs, where we're building games for kids, because trying to teach programmers how to learn stuff is just really painful. Better to teach kids. I started a bunch of conferences. I run a bunch of conferences. I happen to be the culprit who started the Agile movement in India back in 2004. I've been doing a lot of conferences since. Dave Thomas talked a lot about functional programming. For the last 3 years, we've been running a functional programming conference in India. In fact, I was the only guy in the audience who put up my hands for quick check, I realized. I'm just going to fly back, and I'm going to be spending 2 days with John Humes, who wrote Quick Check. He's going to come over to my place, and then we're going to fly to functional conference next week. So I do a lot of conferences. As a part of running conferences, I've been hacking on this pet project of mine called ConfEngine. Probably you would have all used it to see the schedule of the conference. I work right now for a company called Hike Messenger. Hike is India's largest online messaging platform. We happen to be the fastest unicorn in India, 3.7 years to get to $1 billion valuation. And most of these places that I've worked with, one thing that really stood out for me is the lack of collaboration in the company. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk a lot now about, how important is collaboration. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just trying to highlight, I think we've gone overboard with it, and I want to draw some attention to it. So let's start with some solo thinking first in a collaborative session. Think about your works, think about the best work-related idea you've ever had. Everyone's had one? A best work-related idea? Yeah? Think about it. Where did you come up with that idea? Home, sleep, in shower, washroom, while driving. How many of you came up with that idea while collaborating with other people? Not many. I'm not saying nobody, but I think not many. Right? So some people do come up with their work-related best ideas when they're working with other people, but many people actually don't come up. Many people come up with their best ideas when they're pretty much on their own, having some time to do some deep solo thinking. Right? And even we talk about the Agile manifesto. How many people know the real story behind how the manifesto was written? I know Mary knows about that. The story we all believe, or we've been told, is 17 people got together, or specifically 17 white men got together, and they wrote the Agile manifesto in a very collaborative manner. Yes? The real story is, actually they just disagreed. Most of them left. Martin and Watt stayed back, and they actually wrote the manifesto. And since that day, we've never been able to get the 17 people back together in the same room. Till date, we've not been able to do that. Not all the 17 folks. A lot of people don't even talk to each other anymore. That's the glory of collaboration in Agile world, right? Because all these guys are highly opinionated expertise specialists in their own fields. They have very strong opinions. They all have a lot to contribute. And they hold their views very strongly, which is why I think they deserve to be on this list, and we look at them. They were not just trying to pretend like they love everybody and they want to endorse everything else that everybody else is saying. Anyway, have you ever had this weird person on your team who wanted to go off and work on their own? How many people thought of these as problem makers or troublemakers? I certainly did, I will confess. There was a point in time when, if I had people on my team who wanted to go off and work on their own and didn't want to work with other people, I would think of them as, kind of anti-social elements in the team. People who didn't want to help the team move forward. And so we would try everything to get them off the team because we didn't think they were good for the team. And I think I was bloody wrong. I was pretty terribly wrong. Because most of the times I realized that this weird person on the team happened to be someone with real expertise, that someone who had a really different viewpoint that could actually bring to the table. Which is why, I want to ask, what's the real value of collaboration? Why do we put so much emphasis on collaboration? Why is collaboration important to us? Help each other? Sharing knowledge? Building on each other's ideas? Sorry? For better project success? Focus? Work as a team. But I think the real value of collaboration to me comes from the diversity, because we want different ideas. We want different viewpoints, and we believe when we build on different viewpoints, we'll end up with a much better idea or a much better solution, right? That's the real value of collaboration, in my opinion, right? Diversity. When we talk about diversity, it's not just about gender diversity, or it's not just about, what race you come from or what background you come from. There's another very important aspect of diversity, which is about the introvert versus the extrovert diversity. How many people know the definition of introvert and extrovert? Most of us believed, I kind of felt I knew the definition, but I was actually not quite right. So I want to actually outsource my talk to someone else, because Indians are very good at outsourcing. I'm not kidding you. We do outsource a lot of work. So I'm going to outsource my talk to someone else who actually deserves to be on stage better than me. So I'm going to play a little video, and she's going to help us understand the definition of introverts and extroverts, all right?
Clearly, you need to understand what introversion is. And it's different from being shy. Shyness is about fear of social judgment. Introversion is more about how do you respond to stimulation, including social stimulation. So extroverts really crave large amounts of stimulation, whereas introverts feel at their most alive, and they're most switched on, and they're most capable when they're in quieter, more low-key environments. Not all the time, these things aren't absolute, but a lot of the time. So the key then to maximizing our talents is for us all to put ourselves in a zone of stimulation that is right for us. But now here's where the bias comes in. Our most important institutions, our schools and our workplaces, they are designed mostly for extroverts, and for extroverts need for lots of stimulation. And also, we're living through this belief system. We have a belief system right now that I call the new groupthink, which holds that all creativity and all productivity comes from a very oddly gregarious place.
I'm going to pause that because otherwise it's going to get boring. But what's the definition of introverts? Stimulated in a low-key environment. And again, like she said, these are not absolute. It's not like someone's an introvert 100% of the time, but there are times of the day or there are times of the week when we would rather be left alone, and we would want to, basically, we feel more stimulated, more creative when we are kind of in a low-key environment by ourselves. And in some cases, we actually draw upon the energies of other people and we feel more stimulated, right? So it's important to understand this. But why should I care about the introvert versus the extrovert diversity aspect?
A third to a half of the population are introverts. A third to a half. So that's 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know.
I don't have the stats for Singapore, but I had stats from America where basically it says that 49.3% of the people are extroverts, and 50.7% of the people are introverts, which is kind of almost, think about it, 50%. This is across the board, right? And now you take in the context of software projects. What do you think the numbers would look like? most people join software because they feel that they will be in a creative space where they'll be kind of working on their own on a computer and doing some interesting stuff. Yeah, at least that's how I joined computer field. Last thing you realize is then you're put in a group setting and you have to work as a committee and you have to debate with each other and you have to put your viewpoints across. And it's kind of interesting because I believe every 2 out of 3 person on the teams that I have been are actually introverts. And so if we are saying that we really value diversity because that leads to better collaboration, leads to better ideas, and then if 2/3 of your people are actually not comfortable with the kind of things that we do, then are we really endorsing diversity? Are we really getting the advantage of collaboration? Something to think about, right? Because most of the introverts are not most stimulated or most creative when they are put in a planning poker session or when they are put in a planning meeting or in a daily stand-up meeting or stuff like that. These folks are more stimulated when they're kind of left on their own.
Picture the typical classroom nowadays. When I was going to school, we sat in rows. We sat in rows of desks like this, and we did most of our work pretty autonomously. But nowadays, your typical classroom has pods of desks of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 kids all facing each other. And kids are working in countless group assignments, even in subjects like math and creative writing, which you would think would depend on solo flights of thought. Kids are now expected to act as committee members. And for the kids who prefer to go off by themselves or just to work alone, those kids are seen as outliers often, or worse, as problem cases. And the vast majority of teachers reports believing that the ideal student is an extrovert as opposed to an introvert, even though introverts actually get better grades and are more knowledgeable, according to research. Okay, same thing is true in our workplaces. Most of us work in open plan offices without walls, where we are subject to the constant noise and gaze of our coworkers.
So what is the myth that we're trying to bust here? The thing that I'm trying to highlight is we think we are embracing diversity, but something to think about because the way we are structuring ourselves is not necessarily aligned with the majority of the people on our teams.
It's especially important when it comes to creativity and to productivity, because when psychologists look at the lives of the most creative people, what they find are people who are very good at exchanging ideas and advancing ideas, but who also have a serious streak of introversion in them. And this is because solitude is a crucial ingredient often to creativity. So Darwin, he took long walks alone in the woods and emphatically turned down dinner party invitations. Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, he dreamed up many of his amazing creations in a lonely bell tower office that he had in the back of his house in La Jolla, California. And he was actually afraid to meet the young children who read his books for fear that they were expecting him to be this kind of jolly Santa Claus-like figure and would be disappointed with his more reserved persona. Steve Wozniak invented the first Apple computer, sitting alone in his cubicle in Hewlett-Packard where he was working at the time. And he said that he never would have become such an expert in the first place had he not been too introverted to leave the house when he was growing up. Now, of course, this does not mean that we should all stop collaborating. And case in point is Steve Wozniak famously coming together with Steve Jobs to start Apple Computer. But it does mean that solitude matters, and that for some people it is the air that they breathe. And in fact, we have known for centuries about the transcendent power of solitude. It's only recently that we've strangely begun to forget it. If you look at most of the world's major religions, you will find seekers, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, seekers who are going off by themselves, alone, to the wilderness, where they then have profound epiphanies and revelations that they then bring back to the rest of the community. So no wilderness, no revelations. This is no surprise, though, if you look at the insights of contemporary psychology. It turns out that we can't even be in a group of people without instinctively mirroring and mimicking their opinions. Even about seemingly personal and visceral things like who you're attracted to, you will start aping the beliefs of the people around you without even realizing that that's what you're doing. And groups famously follow the opinions of the most dominant or charismatic person in the room. even though there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. I mean, zero. So you might be following the person with the best ideas, but you might not. And you really want to leave it up to chance. Much better for everybody to go off by themselves, generate their own ideas, free from the distortions of group dynamics, and then come together as a team to talk them through in a well-managed environment and take it from there.
Right, so we'll say goodbye to Susan. We're going to move on. We're going to look at some other people's wisdoms. But to kind of just quickly recapping, I think we feel we're embracing diversity because of collaboration, but something to think about. We feel that working together in groups leads to creativity and productivity, something to think about, not necessarily always true. What other problems do you think with this kind of a group working phenomena? Any other problems you guys think about? I think Susan highlighted some, but that's not the only ones. I think there are more. How many people have read Daniel Pink's book called Drive? At least watch this TED Talk. There's a 20-minute TED Talk. I would highly recommend watching his TED Talk. His book is dedicated towards the 3 factors that basically leads to better performance and better personal satisfaction, or essentially what drives us, what motivates us. He basically distills it down to 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Right? These words are kind of quite self-explanatory, so I'm not going to talk about them. But I do want to ask you that when do you feel autonomous? Do you feel autonomous when you're working in a group of people, or you feel autonomous when you're working on your own? Within a larger company, the group might feel autonomous, but within the group, you as an individual, you want to be autonomous. You want to hold your opinions, and you want to try things, and you want to do stuff because you're really passionate, because you believe something is important and you want to try it out. The last thing you want is spend majority of your time convincing other people why this is a good idea before you even started chipping at your idea, right? So a lot of times you actually want the time to do your own stuff, to be autonomous, to decide how you're going to do something before you want to try and convince other people that that's a good idea. Let's talk about mastery. How do you get mastery in anything? A lot of deliberate practice, and deliberate practice is most often when you are sitting by yourself and doing stuff, repeatedly over and over again, because you want to master something. Like think of a musician playing a guitar sitting in the garage, right? They're not like performing as a band all the time. A lot of time goes actually in solo practice, right? Same thing goes for martial arts, same thing goes for artists, same thing goes for any creative field. People spend a huge amount of time doing deliberate practice on their own to achieve mastery, right? Think about software. What's our form of achieving mastery? Building projects after projects? Not really, right? So if you think about autonomy, mastery, to me at least the 2 things require a lot more deep solo thinking and solo time, working by yourself, not necessarily working in a group. So if these are the 3 factors that really motivates us, that really drives us, then at least 2 of them are more kind of independent, more on your own kind of stuff, not necessarily when you're collaborating with other people. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't collaborate, I'm just saying you need to figure out when to collaborate and when not to collaborate, and be aware of the limitations of collaboration, right? And be aware of what drives us. There's a beautiful saying which says, a camel is a horse designed by committee, or why design by committee should die. If you've not read this paper by this lady, she was one of the contributors of Drupal project, and she talks about why design by committee versus design by community, what are the advantages and stuff like that. Actually, let's pause here real quick. How many people think open source is collaborative? If you think about it and you ask people who are open source contributors, so I have done my little contribution in open source. I've built a bunch of open source projects. If you look at most of them, my reason for putting them as open source was not necessarily because I had a shared vision with someone else and we got together and we thought about this would be a great way to change the world. It was mostly about me scratching my personal itch. I had a problem and I didn't find a solution, and I decided to hack something together to solve the problem, and I felt someone else might benefit or someone else might want to take advantage of it, and I put it out there. But I never had a shared vision or a goal or any of that stuff which people talk about when we talk about collaboration. There were no consensus, there were no working together, there were no shared goals, right? So if you look at open source, which I believe is very collaborative in a very different sense than what we think in the Agile community, right? It's collaborative, but it's more async collaboration rather than synchronous collaboration, if you will, right? And the async collaboration is kind of interesting because it leads to a lot of people going on their own, doing stuff, and then coming together and collaborating again pretty much offline in an async manner without actually having to be in the face of each other, which encourages more people. Lennox Torvalds is one of the most introvert person. If you actually talk to him, he actually hates talking to other people. He'd rather be left on his own. But he's behind the whole Linux operating system, right? If it was not for Linux Torvalds, we wouldn't have seen Linux today. But the point I'm trying to make here is, collaboration, which is very well known or very well done in an open source environment, is more async collaboration than the synchronous collaboration that we think of in the Agile world today. Making any sense so far? So what's the path forward, right? So I've talked about, I know I have 10 minutes left. I've talked about some of the limitations of collaboration. So how do we decide as in our own companies when we should encourage collaboration and when we should not encourage collaboration, when we should encourage people to kind of work on their own? I know Mary talks a lot about set-based development. We've done that in a bunch of companies where we take the same thing, 3 groups or 3 individuals go off and build the same thing, and then after a month they basically come together and then we pick the best out of the breed, or we can basically take the ideas from all the 3 and build the 4th one and move forward. And we've actually seen pretty good success in a lot of our products doing that. That's in some sense it's collaborative, but it's not really collaborative in a different sense. So I kind of try to use this Dave Snowden's model a bit to help me kind of decide when I want to collaborate and when I would rather not collaborate. So if you look at it, you can think of this quadrant basically, or this set of systems basically talks about what we call as the obvious systems. Obvious systems are basically where there is a one-to-one response between a stimulus and a response coming out. So think of a highly non-constrained, tightly constrained environment, with when you do something, it always results in something else, and you can pretty much predict what's going to happen beforehand. These are what I would prefer calling like simple systems, which can be easily documented, which can be easily explained, and doesn't really require people to sit down and work together. So when I am thinking of a particular project, a particular task that needs to be accomplished, and if I think it's a simple, it fits into this obvious domain, then I would say collaboration is not really important, because you could work pretty much on your own and accomplish with a little bit of documentation. People should be able to get what they need to do, right? It would be an overkill to try and collaborate on these kinds of problems. Then let's talk about the complicated problems where there is a one-to-many kind of a response, but it's again predictive. You can say if this thing happens, with a little bit of analysis, you can say what's going to happen out of this, one is to many. So a lot of systems, a lot of software systems where it's like business process automation or things like that, you need some amount of subject matter expertise, but you can classify them as a complicated system with, one of these 5 possibilities is going to happen when this event occurs. And in systems like that, again, I think you need that deep expertise where people can work on their own, get together, and use collaboration for decision making, but not necessarily collaboration for understanding the problem, right? So in this kind of area, I would say you need collaboration for decision making, but not necessarily collaboration for figuring out what needs to be done. Then we shift a little bit to these chaotic systems. What are chaotic systems? Chaotic systems are where, if you have an input, you have no correlation to what happens to the output because there is no direct correlation between the input and the output. Think of Indian traffic system, for example. That's the best example I can think of, which is very chaotic. And a lot of people think in a chaotic environment you don't need collaboration, but I actually think in the chaotic environment is where you need maximum collaboration. Chaotic environments are where collaboration is really required. So if you're working in a very highly chaotic environment, then you want to maximize collaboration because there is just no way an individual can keep up with everything that's going on, and it relies on people basically constantly exchanging information, either verbal or non-verbal form of communication going on to actually move forward in the system, right? If you've ever driven on the Indian roads, you can actually see a lot of non-verbal communication happening between the people to maneuver, to figure out the rules, and to move forward. And so it's a very interesting collaborative way of executing something. And so if you're in a highly chaotic startup environment, you will see a lot of people collaborating for that very reason, because for any individual to keep up with everything is just very hard, right? And the last one is where I think majority of the software projects, in large complicated software projects, would fit, is, in my opinion, more of the complex adaptive domain. The complex adaptive domain is where the systems and the agents kind of co-evolve. So you show something to a user and they said, this is great, but now that I see this, I think this would have been better. So the expectation kind of keeps shifting as you do, or because your competitor does something, your market again shifts and so forth. So when you have areas where you're working in a complex adaptive system, this is where you actually don't want to collaborate, in my opinion. This is where you actually want to have independent, distortion-free experimentation going on, so that different viewpoints can be brought to the table, and then you again kind of use a little bit of collaboration as a checkpoint, but let people go back and work independently. Like a lot of set-based development, I think, would fit into that kind of a space where people work pretty much independently, because you don't want distortion of ideas in this domain can lead to everyone kind of going down the same path, while you want actually people to go and attack a problem with very different viewpoints. So in a complex adaptive system which is constantly evolving, you need parallel independent experiments. And that's achieved through less collaboration, in my opinion, than more collaboration. So if I were to summarize, this is how I look at the world. This is how I see things in terms of when I would want to collaborate and when I don't want to collaborate. So simple stuff or obvious stuff, I would recommend not to collaborate. Complicated things, I would recommend to collaborate for decision making, but not necessarily to understand. So a lot of times we go into meetings and everyone's expecting that in the meeting they're going to learn stuff and then going to make a decision. That's a bad idea. You essentially want people to do their homework, do their deep thinking, and bring something to the table and use the meeting very effectively to basically make a decision very quickly. That's this kind of a domain. In a chaotic domain, I would say you need people to really be watching out all the time and working with each other very closely. And in the complex adaptive, you actually want people to go independently and do stuff on their own and kind of sync back once in a while, but essentially keep continuing to independently experiment stuff. So that's how I look at collaboration and how I would kind of say when you would want to collaborate, when you don't want to collaborate. I think I have 5 minutes left, so that will be for questions.
Hi Naresh, I know this has nothing to do with Agile, as mentioned earlier, but I'd say in a team, a guy who wants to work alone always and not independent. So how do I bring him to Agile framework like Scrum? Like how do I make him work together with the team?
Don't.
But I need him, right, because he's in a team. So I need him for sprint planning, I need him for retrospective.
What is that you're trying to accomplish, right? I would ask myself, what is that I'm trying to accomplish? If I want this person to pretty much execute on a set of things which fit into one of those 4 domains, then I would use a strategy according to that. So, wanted to bring this slide up. So it depends what kind of work you guys are doing, right? And based on that is when I would decide if I want to bring this person in, or it's better to actually let this person kind of be on their own. Just to kind of talk about some of my recent experience, we're building something really complicated in the messaging app that we're building for, we have about 108 million users. It's pretty complicated in terms of the kinds of different phones we need to support. So we actually have independent people working without actually ever talking to each other to try and solve certain hard problems. And for that kind of a problem, we actually let them to just work off their own or go off, like fly them to some other place and just sit there and work by yourself. And we don't want them to collaborate, right? So if that's the nature of work you're doing, then you probably want to use a strategy that aligns with that. But if you're basically doing something which fits more in a complicated environment, then maybe you want to try and bring the person in for a little bit. But again, you have to keep in mind what kind of a personality is this individual, right? Is this person going to be at its most creative when it's working in your planning sessions and other meetings, or would the person be better off working on their own and then just sending a small email summarizing what they're doing? I think we beat too much on emails and other kinds of things, and we kind of treat that as really bad, but that's just taking a very extreme view of the world. I have seen fantastic collaboration happen on emails, right? So it's not necessarily all bad. So maybe that might work in your case. I don't know. You have to see what works in your case. Any other questions, or I've killed all the enthusiasm you have? Do I think agile practices are chaotic? No, because if you are, well, it depends what you mean by agile practices. These days we use that term so loosely, so I don't know what you actually mean. If you're referring to Scrum, then for sure not. They're not chaotic. They're trying to basically treat everyone like bots, in my opinion. Just treat everyone like they all fall in line with these exact same rules. Most places where I have worked, we actually don't do stand-ups, we don't do planning, we don't do any of that nonsense. And actually that is what got me to really think. I think back in 2006, I joined this company called DirectEye. And the first day when I was at the company, I felt like this company is going to crash and burn in the next couple of hours. Because they didn't use version control. Right? They pretty much, everyone kind of worked on their own. Most people wouldn't even show up to offices. They would work from home or they would work from somewhere else. You think there's no way this company is going to do anything meaningful, right? They just sold one of their businesses for 900 million. And the point I was trying to make is that we don't use any Agile over there. Any of the Scrum practices, when I say Agile, that's what it means these days. We didn't have stand-ups, we didn't do planning, we didn't do any of that stuff, but yet people were actually, because people had bought into the overall vision of what they wanted to do, and they were highly aligned on that. Yep. Okay, I get your point. What I was trying to say is that I think Scrum treats the world as a chaotic world, but it's not really. In that kind of environment. If you actually treated it as like a complicated system, I think you would be much better off, in my opinion. There are certainly projects that fit into the chaotic model, which is like early stage startup, really trying to figure out what the problem we are even trying to solve, and just a lot of stuff going on. So you're basically bouncing back and forth between these two areas. Once you actually stabilize into a larger company, that's when I think you move here, you start putting in more processes, you start constraining the environment, and you kind of get people to operate in a certain way. So you start somewhere here, bounce back and forth, then kind of get here to some extent, and eventually die out. That's how I look at it. All right, I'll be around. Thank you again, and hope to collaborate with you a little bit more.